Welcome back to my channel. In this video, we will be looking at patterns in natural communities. The three patterns we will be looking at are ecological succession, stratification, and zonation. Ecological succession is the process of gradual change and development in the structure of an ecosystem over time. It usually occurs after a disturbance and involves a series of stages, from a bare environment to a more complex, stable community. There are two main types: primary and secondary succession. 1. Primary succession. Primary succession occurs in an environment without soil where life has not existed before. It begins on barren surfaces like rock or newly formed volcanic islands where there is no initial vegetation or soil. The first organisms to colonize these areas are called pioneer species like lichen and moss, which can survive on bare rock. These species break down the rock, gradually forming soil. As soil builds up, grasses and small plants grow, followed by shrubs and then small trees. This can be called an intermediate community. Eventually, a stable, mature ecosystem develops with a rich diversity of species called a climax community. This might be a forest or a grassland, depending on the region's climate and other factors. The formation of life on a lava flow in Hawaii after volcanic activity is a good example of primary succession. 2. Secondary succession. Secondary succession happens in areas where an ecosystem previously existed but was disturbed or destroyed, such as by fire, flood, or human activities like farming. Unlike primary succession, soil is already present, so recovery can be faster. After a disturbance, pioneer species, often fast-growing plants and grasses, first colonize the area. These are followed by shrubs, then young trees, as the ecosystem rebuilds its complexity. The ecosystem eventually reaches a stable climax state similar to what existed before the disturbance. Forest regrowth after a wildfire or the recovery of a field left to naturalize after being farmed are examples of secondary succession. The second type of community pattern that we are going to investigate is stratification. Stratification is the layering or organization of an ecosystem into different levels, each with distinct conditions, species, and interactions. This layered structure can occur vertically or horizontally within an environment, creating unique habitats that support a diversity of life. Stratification is commonly observed in forests, aquatic systems, and soils. Let us look at stratification in a forest. Forests, especially tropical and temperate ones, have vertical stratification where vegetation and animal life are divided into different layers. 1. The canopy layer. This is the uppermost layer, formed by the crowns of tall trees, which receives the most sunlight. It provides shelter and food for many animals and is crucial for photosynthesis. In a New Zealand forest, tall trees that make up this layer include the towering kauri, rimu, and tawa. These trees often have dense foliage with wide, flat leaves to maximize light absorption. Native birds such as kaka, tui, and kereru are common in the canopy. They feed on fruits, flowers, and insects in this high, sunny layer. Bats like the lesser short-tailed bat can also be found roosting in the upper branches. 2. The subcanopy layer. This layer is below the canopy and is home to birds, small mammals, and reptiles adapted to shaded conditions where smaller trees and shrubs grow in the filtered light. In a New Zealand forest, this layer contains smaller trees such as silver fern, kowhai, and kamahi. They have adapted to moderate light and compete for the resources left by the canopy above. This layer is home to a variety of bird species, such as bellbirds and fantails, that hunt insects and feed on flowers. Insects like beetles and spiders are also prevalent in this strata. 3. Tree fern layer. In a New Zealand forest, you may find this strata of tree ferns below the subcanopy. The tree fern layer is often dominated by tall ferns that add to the dense, lush forest understory. Plant species like mamaku or the black tree fern, hueki, and silver fern are common here. They are adapted to lower light levels with large fronds to capture the limited sunlight that filters through. Animal species like weta, including the large tree weta, inhabit this layer using the fern fronds for shelter. Birds such as the North Island robin forage here for insects. 4. Shrub layer. This layer consists of smaller shrubs and young trees. It's denser with limited light, providing a thick understory supporting various insects, birds, and small animals. Native shrubs like coprosma, high-now saplings, and young tree ferns populate this layer. These plants are shade-tolerant and contribute to the forest's dense undergrowth. Small birds like silver rays forage here. Insects and geckos are also common, hiding among the leaves and branches. 5. Leaf litter and forest floor. The ground layer is composed of decomposing leaves, branches, and other organic material. It plays a crucial role in nutrient cycling. Mosses, fungi, and small flowering plants like native orchids grow here, thriving in the high humidity and low light. A variety of insects, including earthworms, millipedes, and weta, are found here, breaking down the leaf litter. Kiwi birds are known to forage in this layer, using their keen sense of smell to locate insects. Snails and slugs are also present, thriving in the moist environment. Each layer in the forest has its own distinct role in creating a balanced ecosystem, with plants and animals specially adapted to the specific conditions of their habitats. The stratification helps maintain biodiversity by providing niches that allow species to avoid direct competition. Now we are going to explore the third community pattern, zonation. First of all, what is zonation? Zonation refers to the distinct, horizontal bands of species that occur in response to varying environmental conditions. On rocky shores, the intertidal zone is divided into subzones. This division is based on the frequency and duration of tidal exposure, wave action, sunlight, temperature, and salinity changes. Zonation on New Zealand's rocky shores is a fascinating example of how environmental gradients influence species distribution. New Zealand's rocky shores often exhibit four main zones. 1. Splash zone or the superlittoral zone. This zone is above the high tide line, where water splashes but does not reach during normal tides. This zone experiences high sunlight and temperature fluctuations, and this zone is usually very dry. Lichens, algae, and some hardy periwinkles thrive here because they can withstand dehydration and intense sunlight. 2. High tide zone or the upper littoral zone. This zone is covered by water only during high tides. Frequent exposure to air, extreme temperature shifts, and high wave energy are some of the environmental conditions that prevail in this zone. Barnacles and some species of limpets populate this zone. These animals have adaptations to cling tightly to rocks and withstand drying out. 3. Mid-tide zone or the mid-littoral zone. This zone is regularly submerged and exposed with each tidal cycle. Moderate exposure to air, high nutrient availability, and high wave energy are some of the major environmental factors that affect the distribution of species in this zone. Here, in this zone, you will find a rich variety of species, including mussels, sea stars, and anemones. These species benefit from frequent feeding opportunities and moderate protection from desiccation. 4. Low tide zone or the lower littoral zone. This zone is only exposed during the lowest tides. Constant water coverage, minimal temperature changes, and low desiccation risk are the main environmental factors that determine the distribution of species in this zone. Seaweeds, coral and algae, and grazing fish flourish here. Species such as sea urchins and sponges are also common, relying on constant submersion. Let us look at the major adaptations of rocky shore species. Each species has unique adaptations that allow them to survive in their respective zones. For instance, barnacles close their shells tightly to retain moisture during low tide. Limpets have strong, muscular feet to adhere to rocks even in intense wave conditions. Seaweeds in the lower littoral zone have flexible, strong holdfasts to withstand waves. Now, look at the major environmental factors influencing zonation patterns. 1. Desiccation or drying out. The higher the zone, the more likely organisms are to dry out. 2. Temperature. Increased temperature fluctuation higher up means only hardy, resistant species can survive there. 3. Wave action. Organisms must withstand physical impact, particularly in exposed zones. This structured distribution of organisms in response to changing conditions offers a beautiful natural illustration of how species adapt to survive in different niches. We will look at zonation in detail in my next video. Thanks for watching the video on community patterns. See you next time with another Science Explainer video.